All right, y'all, welcome to another edition of TSC webinars. We have quite the show for you today. And this time, instead of doing just one person, we have a panel. And this panel is one I'm particularly excited about because we're going to talk about remote leadership. And as you know, like there's probably a lot of topics you've heard about leading remotely. We're talking about mental health, burnout, but this kind of came about when I think Jinal randomly said in the Slack channel we're in, yeah, let's do a clubhouse chat, and we started bouncing off ideas, and we talked about what are the topics about remote work that we're not talking about like anywhere enough, and we did like a warm up call just to brainstorm ideas, and we're like, whoa, we got to take this live somewhere because this is pretty fascinating stuff. We were talking about like I think power dynamics, like the interruption of meetings and like getting into like deep work, like just how your culture is impacted. It was stuff that like I'm not reading much about, and like I feel like I'm pretty well sourced on those kind of things. And so I'm super excited to have you today, Shane, Julian, and Jinal. I think today's going to be a really awesome convo. And this is one of those combos that for people that couldn't have made it, have messaged me saying, please make sure this is recorded. Please send this to me. So we'll go ahead and get started so we can finish on time because today we're going to be asking, I got some questions for them. And this is one of those sessions where I feel like we're going to learn a lot from each other. But moving from that, we're going to give the last 15 minutes here today to the crowd to ask questions as well. So, to get a little gist into like what 368 webinars is, if this is your first time, our mission for these webinars is just like our companies, is to challenge common thinking so that we can create a common future. And a common future is painted off of this, which is the brand lie. It's making sure that there's no gap between what you say and what you do. We find that that brand lie exists for companies that obsess over growth, over purpose. And our webinars have really fascinating people that stick to making sure that brand gap is as small as possible. And today's session is no different. And I ask for anyone that joins our session today is, work hard to disconnect so you can connect. It's important because, these convos here, hopefully you can learn something. And, as per every TSC webinar, it's hopefully something that you can enact in the next 72 hours. And then next is the importance of blowing up the chat with your questions. We want to hear from y'all. We want to make sure this is interactive. We'll take questions as near the end, but there's a really fascinating question that comes up. You can bet that we'll bring it up. And finally, if you have not seen any of our previous webinars or you're looking for a link, just go to 368.com/webinars. That's a good place to start. And that leads us to today, which is remote leadership panel. We're gonna talk about creating connection among remote teams with Shane Metcalf here. Shane is someone that I actually met through his co-founder, David. We're big fans of his company, 15Five. He's the chief culture officer. Shane, as you were telling me, you used to be an executive coach, right? And you never thought you'd jump into tech. Is that correct?
Yeah, totally. I had no plans of starting a company. I had a really great lifestyle business, not working too hard. And then, life kind of fell in, and 9 years later, here I am.
Yeah. For those of y'all that haven't heard of 15Five, definitely recommend them. They are a great platform for performance management. Their content series as well is great if you're looking to understand how to better ask questions for your team, see how your company's doing for your culture. Next, we have Jinal here. Jinal is someone that I super respect as not only just like as a marketer, but just as a person. I've gotten the honor to know her through a Slack channel that we share called Sunday Dinner. She's always the one that asks like really fascinating questions where it's like, damn, I didn't think about that. So Jinal, we've worked together in the past with the presentation session. We've chatted on different panels together. Thank you for coming today. I really look forward to learning more from you. She was the one, everybody, that shared like, I think we were missing walking to meetings, and that kinetic energy of inspiration is missing. When she said that, I was like, I want to make sure we address that. That was brilliant. So thank you for joining us, Jinal.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Also, one of you should say something about Feather, because Feather is a really cool company that I wish I could use the services of.
Yeah, Jinal, why don't you tell us a little bit about Feather?
Yeah, I'll plug Feather in. We're a furniture rental startup currently available in New York, San Francisco, LA, and DC. And we are trying to do for easy understanding what Rent the Runway did with clothing. There's several reasons why furniture rental makes sense, especially as millennials tend to move 7 to 8 times before they settle down, before they're in their early 30s. And there's a huge problem with fast furniture, just like fast clothing and fast food. 20 billion pounds of furniture actually ends up in landfills. It is not as recyclable as one might think. So we're really trying to solve this challenge and in return provide something we believe is of extreme value to customers. We're 4 years old, so very early in our journey. And yeah, I'm privileged to lead marketing there. We have an amazing team across all fronts, and building new behaviors in customers in the culture is something I've never done before in my career. And it's been an incredible experience so far.
Amazing team indeed. And, word of respect for Jinal. And last but definitely not least, Julian here. Julian here is the new head of brand strategy of VistaPrint. He's someone that I've called many times asking for advice about, how to grow an agency. And Julian, I've called you sensei many times, and I think it weirds you out, but you really have been a great coach and teacher. And, I was super stoked because Julian's always been attending these webinars. To finally get him on board, that was exciting because I wanted to introduce, our network to him because he's always full of great ideas. And also on top of just being a new head of brand strategy at VistaPrint, he's also a new dad as well. So congrats again, Julian, on that.
Thank you, Kenny, for that very warm introduction. Hello, everyone. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. Well, y'all, I say let's get right into it. We are going to talk about remote leadership now, and we're going to get into this with the first question being, I want to hear from each one of y'all. First, share what your company does exactly, and what is the remote situation looking like for y'all now? So I guess we'll start with Julie, and then we'll go with Jinal, then Shane. So.
Yep. So VistaPrint helps small businesses feel big through all their marketing needs, online, offline, through design, and they have adopted a full remote first strategy. So not just for lockdown, but ongoing. I've been there a short while, but it's been a really good introduction to setting up the tools to succeed for specifically asynchronistic working. So they're a remote first company.
What about you, Jinal?
Yeah. So Feather, we are sort of what we describe as in the consumer tech. We're a consumer tech company, which means we are a very engineering heavy culture. And that means that from day one, we were prepared to work from home, remote work was part of the culture. With COVID, with last year, we decided to go 100% remote first, much like VistaPrint did. So we had infrastructure, tools, all of that was in place. I think that for us, the challenge has been, how do you navigate, everyone's personal challenges along with, as a venture-backed company, having really strong goals, how it's impacting us. So that was sort of the challenging part for us to navigate. And I'm sure we'll dig into that. But, from an infrastructure tools point of view, we were great. We are now just figuring out the culture piece. How does DE&I thrive in a remote culture?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, once new employees are onboarded, how do you get them to a point where they feel comfortable making jokes and really sort of letting their guard down? So those are the more nuanced things that we are tackling with right now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And we will get into the DEI stuff later, because that is definitely one of those topics that aren't spoken about enough, in my opinion. And Shane, tell us a little bit about 15.5. Hopefully I gave y'all a great, a good enough description, but obviously you can do one better.
Cool. So 15.5 is a people and performance platform. And what does that mean? It means we provide solutions both to HR and to managers. And so we have everything from performance reviews, engagement surveys, one-on-one templates and tools to make one-on-ones more effective, check-ins so that you can actually be doing the asynchronous check-in with your people on a regular basis. Fundamentally, we believe that managers are the fulcrum point in any company. If you want to build a great, it's like, even in this conversation with remote, you can have a good universal remote culture, but if your manager sucks at managing a remote team, it's not going to work. And so we really design solutions for both HR leaders, people ops, as well as managers. And we are, okay, so we're a couple hundred people. We've been a hybrid from day one. You know, it was like 9 years ago, we were all doing a small, you know, when it was like 5 of us, and we were talking about our values and that we all love travel. We all love the idea of being able to travel the world and not have to compromise life in order to build a company. And so we decided from early on, one of our core values would be embrace freedom and flexibility. And so we've always been a hybrid company. So we've had offices in San Francisco, New York City, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And then about half the company was fully remote. And so it's been interesting in this whole pandemic of finding the balance. You know, not that much changed, but a lot has changed. And it's interesting thinking about how we move forward into what we call dynamic work.
Mm. You know, I want to piggyback on what you just said about values here. You know, has your core values changed at all at 15.5 when you'll switch to remote? Like, you know, from hybrid, I guess, like, you know, as like companies like shift how they work, do values typically change? Like, do you see values change?
Well, I think that, you know, my philosophy with values is that you should be able to solve every business problem with one of your values. The moment that you can't solve your business problems with your core values is the time to really consider updating the values. And so we did change. We went from 10 values to 4, but that was pre-COVID. And if anything, our values have helped guide us through a fully remote chapter.
Yeah,
I think the other piece on this is that remote has put a spotlight on the importance of communicating your values, right? And not taking for granted that they just get picked up by osmosis. So I think one of the good things to come out of it, whatever model people go back to, right, is that you've got to be really intentional about communicating. What do you stand for? What are we all driving towards? What are we all connected to on a culture and value and a vision level? And then bringing that down to a day-to-day level, communicating like what's happening next, what are expectations, proactive communication. So I think that is something that was maybe taken for granted, that you just cannot take for granted in remote. And I hope people hold on to that communication, whatever model they go back to, because I think it's been super valuable.
I agree with that. So at Feather, we have 6 values. I think one thing I've found is in such, you know, what we're going through right now is an inflection point, right? Like that's not the norm. Like companies, you know, this is not sort of something you're going to face every single year. But what I have found is that of our 6 values, 2 of them are maybe indexing higher right now in how we show up as a company, as leaders, right? So we have you know, understand by listening, empathy, and we have resilience, the idea of not quitting, as two of our 6 values. And I find that our tone lately, our approach to solving, you know, personnel challenges has definitely, you know, we've been over indexing on these 2 values, and it makes sense for what we are going through right now. The other thing I will say in addition to values is I'm a huge proponent of OKRs as well. I think when there is so much uncertainty around you, there is incredible need, even more so than before, to make sure that your company goals, your OKRs, what you're supposed to achieve each quarter, every single employee is super aware of that and is on completely the same page. And these are being reinforced and repeated again and again and again. That is something we've done very successfully. And you know, this is the one piece that anchors everyone. It does give you some sense of, yes, there is a lot of uncertainty, you know, with the business around us, but I know for the next 3 months what I'm supposed to put my head down and focus on.
Jinal, I love that. And I think that one of the reasons why the world struggled going remote is that I think that often we would be, oh, people are in the office and working. And so that's the sense of that we're making progress. And then all of a sudden you don't see people and people are like, I don't have clear goals. I'm not measuring my people based on outcomes. I was just kind of assuming they were working because they were in the office. And all of a sudden, the importance of having clearly defined objectives of these are the outcomes we're actually going for. The output is actually less relevant than the outcomes. And so I think that the companies that do remote the best are very explicit in what are the outcomes and the objectives that you're trying to achieve, because then it doesn't really matter how or when you're doing the work to achieve the outcome.
Exactly.
But if you don't know what the outcomes are, it's way more comforting to know that, well, these my people are in the office 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I think
I
the
love
other,
that. Go ahead.
I think that the other thing that I think has been proven is that I think there was a sense before that we need to see our employees, like, are they really going to be productive and work if they're not in front of us and clocking in and out? And of course, everyone's responsible. Everyone's a grown up, and everyone wants to contribute because it's fulfilling. But as Shane says, and Jinal, if you've got that direction, it just facilitates that momentum that much more, right? You know, and so I love this shift from responsibility for contribution and outcomes versus time spent, you know. So I think that's a good evolution.
Yeah. And trust, right? Like trust.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Like a remote culture with low trust is going to be sucky. It's because everyone's going to feel like, oh God, I got to be constantly on Slack. I've got to always be in meetings to show that I'm actually here and prove that I'm not slacking off and watching Netflix. And so it's just trust. I mean, trust has always been the foundation of great culture. And I just can't emphasize enough, do the things that create high trust environments.
Can we get into that? And like, you know, how are you doing things right now that creates more trust with teams? Specifically, you know, if there are people that have been onboarded like in person versus not in person, how are you getting them to mesh and trust each other more? And this is an open question to all three of y'all.
I can take this. You know, I have to say, you know, our largest team that we have at Feather is our what we call EPD team, which is engineering, product, and design. And you know, in so many ways, they are sort of the foundation for the company, right? Like as a marketer, you know, I need stuff to be able to market, whether it's a new feature, a new product, you know, new something. And I have been extremely inspired by the work that our engineering team has done with building that culture. So I'll give you a few examples. One, you know, we're all on Slack. Obviously, we're all taking advantage of things like Donut across teams. But our engineering team went a couple of steps ahead. And what they started to do is they've created an engineering cultural club calendar. And they have self-organized themselves, you know, each individual. It's not always a VP of engineering sort of organizing it, but people take turns, but they have a book club where everybody reads an article and just gets together and has a debate. Then they have something literally called a pointless debate, which is what's better, a dolphin or a shark, right? And two people will get together and debate it, and then there'll be a winner. They also do, you know, we have an all hands that happens every 2 weeks. And after the all hands, they have their own little happy hour that they get together on. And I found, you know, this constant touch in different ways that's not just about work has been so beneficial for the teams to feel that sense of camaraderie, to feel. They do game nights, they do like a lot of other things. They have a whole channel on crypto where they talk about things. So it's actually been a huge point of inspiration for the rest of the company, where, you know, the other teams are much smaller. My team is 8 people. It's growing, but I'm now trying to sort of figure out like, okay, what is a version of what the engineering team is doing for my team? And we found that, you know, we do our employee engagement surveys quite regularly. And we found that these events, you know, ever since we've started really focusing on them, the shift in sentiment, the shift in morale has been actually quite measurable. Because you miss, that's what you miss when you're at work, right? You have these, and engineers would stay late at night at the office and would have game nights, would have, you know, would hang out. And in absence of that, this has become a really great way for them, even the new ones, to start getting a feel for their team, to meet other engineers who they might not be working with on a specific project. And that's really set the tone at the company in terms of like, all right, like how can other teams now take a page from this book and apply it to their own teams?
Yeah, I piggyback on that via debate wise. And Julian, you're the one that actually mentioned in our first chat about like the absence of debate happening in companies and where it's healthy because conflict builds connection. Can you unpack that a little bit about like what you worry about, like losing, actually having debates within companies?
For creative cultures, and I think all companies have hopefully a degree of creative culture. Debate and tension is really, really important, right? And for collaboration, debate and tension is really important, because the definition of creativity is two diverse perspectives coming together. And so on Zoom, it's maybe a little bit, it's maybe a little bit harder to read the body language, and it's maybe a little bit easier to sort of get into an efficiency mode of just kind of getting things ticked off versus making space for quality interactions, right? So that's the first thing to be really mindful of. The other thing is that I think in the office, there's a real value to the serendipity of walking out of a meeting, someone bumping into someone going, hey, that comment, I thought about X, Y, Z. That's kind of really useful. But I think you can replace that being creative with technology. You know, I've found if I'm in a few back-to-back 10 people Zoom meetings, having a 3-person FaceTime or talking to someone as I walk my dog suddenly feels really intimate and feels much less formal. So I think you can replicate the informality of it. You just got to be a bit creative with it. But I think those are the things to watch out for. Make sure you're leaving space for debate, and debate is messy. And so make space for the messiness, right? That's the real takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I'll just jump in on like, how do we build trust? How do we create some of the more human elements of culture? Because I think that we've gone from the human interaction being an emergent phenomenon inside of an office to being something that needs to be deliberately engineered into the course of our work. And so what we do things like, we start our all hands with a gratitude meditation. And so we do like 5 minutes of just reflecting on gratitude and really contemplating, like we were looking at chaos and innovation as the gratitude on Monday. And on another all hands, we'll do like 5 minutes, we call the high five, which is like our kind of a play on one of our features. And the high five is somebody leads it for the month, and they can do basically whatever they want with the whole company for 5 minutes. And so we have somebody doing like poetry slams this month, where like they're having one person read a poem and then they're responding and doing like like old school poetry slam. And it's just so cool. And it just brings so much energy. And then my other favorite thing is Question Friday. And that's every Friday. It's an optional meeting for the whole company. And, you know, everybody joins. There's a question master for the month. And then we ask the question and then break out into Zoom rooms and go around. And it's that opportunity for telling our human stories, for sharing the non-business related aspects of who we are. Because I think ultimately, when we think about dynamic work environments, it's not just work from where you want and how you want, but it's also bring more of yourself to the table, bring a broader spectrum of our humanity into the equation. And that's what I think of as dynamic work. And so just constantly thinking about how can we make space for us to be humans and not just professionals.
Yeah. We've just to build on that, we've had a lot of success with both at my previous place and even just onboarding to Vista of exactly that, inviting people to tell the story of their lives outside of work. It could be slides, it could be oral story, Media Arts Lab. We had this Friday video that took on a whole life of its own. And at Vista, you know, in the onboarding, there was someone from IT who made guitars and ukuleles in their own time. There's someone from finance who had a passion for cooking, and they worked in homeless shelters cooking. So these stories really quickly give you this sort of richness and diversity, and really quickly help you connect and see the depth of people. And I think when you do that, as Shane's saying, you get away from this being, we are all wearing our company hat. And actually what you have is 300 people with unique stories converging at this one place and one time. And when you tap into that and acknowledge that and uncover that, then that's really rich and powerful. And also a great equalizer. It's a great way of junior people to have a voice, introverted people to have a voice. Everyone has it, can tell their story. So it's a simple thing to do, but it's really powerful, really powerful.
I second everything you're saying. You know, one thing I'll also add is we can never underestimate the power of leaders setting the tone and setting the example. So, it's often, we found initially, we actually, it's like, oh yeah, let's do all these events and people will show up. The leaders don't really, you can use your time to get the work done. And we found that wasn't actually the right way to do it. It's only when the leaders started showing up. We also have like a fitness morning, we have a yoga meditation. Once they started to see that, no, actually the people at the company, the leaders of the company, our C-suite, our VPs, they're showing up, it actually made it okay and made it actually, it's like, oh, this is something I actually want to be part of. This is not something unimportant that the company is doing. And I cannot underscore and underline and emphasize that enough, like leaders needing to set by example.
Yeah.
1000% agree.
Totally. And, we are already getting some really interesting questions here. I want to go on a question that, and this is like, it can go actually to you, Jinal, because it relates to like the DEI stuff. It came from Adam Katzenbach, who's a fellow Sunday dinner member. What's up, Adam? Speaking of serendipity moment, do you envision favoritism entering the workplace for those who can go into the office versus those who remain remote?
I would be lying if I say that, human tendency like that, we will, in some ways, as much as we've learned and, all these new amazing behaviors we've taken on. I think if the hybrid workplace emerges, or even I know that, people who live in the same city are getting together, their relationships are much stronger. You'll definitely see like pockets of stronger relationship. With regards to favoritism, what we found so far, look, and we're only 1 year in this new remote world, right? What we have found is that there is actually less tolerance right now for unproductivity, or for, employees who aren't quite meeting the standard of the work output. And that is what we are seeing is driving more of a, I wouldn't call it favoritism, but definitely more conversation on, like I want to work with so-and-so, not with so-and-so, because so-and-so tends to slack, or they don't meet their deadlines, or they're not really good at communication. We're finding that, yes, spending time and relationships are helpful, but it's really how someone is showing up in the workplace. Are they on time in meetings? Are they actually doing what they said they would do? Are they, with Slack messages, are they prompt to respond? Do they need to be chased? These are the behaviors that we are finding are the ones creating a sense of, this team is stronger, or we want to work with so-and-so, we want to work with so-and-so. And we're trying to impart like, set expectations on both sides, which is, what is expected behavior in a remote environment, right? Just because someone slacks you and Slack is going off 24/7, interferes with your deep work, should you be expected to respond to that? What is that expected time frame to respond to a Slack message? What is the expected time frame to respond to email? When should email be used over Slack? I think we have way too many ways to communicate with each other now. So as leaders, we had to drive clarity around that. But also, use that to make it clear that performance was still extremely critical. Favoritism, I haven't seen that yet. I don't think, I think it's quite possible that can happen, but I also feel like accountability is so much more of a, people want to feel like a sense of accountability, and they want to show that they're doing what they said they would do. I think that is maybe overshadowing the favoritism conversation right now for where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting question in 6 to 12 months as companies really do start returning. And because I think that, if we look at why would somebody that's in person get treated differently than somebody that's remote, and it all comes down to relationship, to familiarity of, oh, I spend more time with this person, I have higher quality interactions with them, and so therefore my kind of emotional lizard brain, my emotional like lizard and mammalian brain is like, oh, you're like me, I feel comfortable with you. And so I think what we need to think about is, how do we reverse engineer some of the higher quality relationships? How do we get virtual and remote to have really good communication, really good connection? And that's going to help balance out some of the haves and have-nots. But I think that needs to be something that, if you're going to do hybrid, you have to do remote first. Like you can't have 10 people in the boardroom meeting with 3 people on Zoom that are like, barely figures up on the screen that are kind of afterthoughts. You need to have people on your laptops, and so that everybody can see each other's faces. There's still 10 people in the room, but like every 15.5 big meeting that we would have in offices, everyone was on their own laptop. And there's downsides to that. Sometimes I hate that, right? Because I'm like, oh, I just want to just like be in a room without a computer on. But if you're going to do remote first, if you're going to do this well, it's really important to level the playing field and not create those situations that are exclusive. That doesn't mean you don't build a strong culture in that office, don't have happy hours, don't allow for that connection. Just make sure that you're keeping some balance in.
Yeah, agree with that.
So I want to go back to performance here, because being remote is not an excuse for low performance. Retweeting what Shane said earlier. There's a question here that came from Adrian Owen, who's in our group of attendees here. Have you seen a framework that is useful for communicating goals and outcomes and keeping them on track? And then the next is, how often do you check in on goals and progress, and how granular, weekly, monthly, or quarterly? I'll post it here in the chat.
Yeah, I'm hard pressed not to just like do a pitch for 15.5 here, because it's like, this is exactly what we do. You create clarity, clarity on your goals. And then through the asynchronous check-ins, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, you're actually reflecting on them. You're actually checking on the progress, because the problem that happens with OKRs in any other goals is like, you set them at the beginning of the quarter or the beginning of the year, and you're like, yeah, rah, rah, rah. And then the reactive nature of work pulls you in a million different directions. And it's 2 weeks before the end of the quarter, and you're like, ooh, where is that spreadsheet those things live in? And then you try to hustle to make progress on them. And so this is where asynchronous communication on a more regular basis is something that I think is really important when it comes to definitely in virtual, but really any environment, to keep progress and keep your goals top of mind.
I also am a huge proponent of what we call the operating rhythm of a company, right? Like, what happens every quarter, like literally, like each company should be aware, right? So for example, with us, the first week of each quarter is a retro of the previous quarter. And it happens with each team. Then it happens at a leadership level. There are learnings, there are things that we could have done better, what we did do, what we don't do. The last, the midpoint of each quarter is when the next quarter planning cycle starts. So we have a very strict operating rhythm that's continued to get better, that we put into place. There isn't any surprises. There are expectations from every single individual on tools and templates on what needs to be filled out, what were the benchmarks we were supposed to meet, what wasn't met. I think this probably comes partly because our culture maybe is a little bit of a hybrid of Silicon Valley and New York consumer companies, and maybe it's venture backed, so maybe they think it differently. I've been in public environments. I was at Newell Brands. I was at another startup. We didn't have such an incredible rhythm on like, here's what's supposed to happen every single quarter. And that is, when you create the right structure, when you create the right process and the right templates beneath it, then it becomes much easier to hold yourself accountable to these OKRs, to these objectives. And look, the point of OKRs, of course, you want to get as good as you can with saying you're going to do something and delivering on it. We started this journey last year. We obviously, didn't nail it the first time. Now a year in Q2 OKRs, we're getting much better at that. We're getting much better at realizing, okay, we will always have a few things more than what we think we can accomplish each quarter, but we have to know at the end of it why we weren't able to do that, so that we can actually manage our expectations better and do a better job of planning for Q3. And then there's a push and pull that happens, right? So each team will come back with their own OKRs that reflect the company objectives, but then it's like, all right, this is not aggressive enough. This needs to be different. There needs to be more or less. And that is active dialogue that again is baked in to the, in the middle of the quarter, the conversation following the next quarter. I am a huge proponent of that. We've done a lot of research on this. We've operationalized it and we continue to tweak it. So yeah, that's something I would just add on to what Shane said.
Can we define real quickly what an OKR is, just to make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, it's I would describe it as an organizing mechanism for companies to just to know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing. The abbreviation OKR literally stands for objectives, KPIs, and results, correct?
Objectives and
Key results.
key results.
Key results.
Exactly.
And so it's like, yeah, the objective is the aspirational vision that you're trying to achieve. And then the key results are the measurable ways you achieve that objective.
Exactly.
Yep. So I'm gonna actually
and I will just say one thing. OKRs are hard. Like, there is a learning curve with OKRs, and it's not something that you can pick up in a quarter or two and feel like, oh yeah, we've got this. And so there's, it's like, why it's actually part of why we've created so much educational resources around OKRs is because it's like, I mean, we build OKR software and we're still working on figuring this stuff out. And so there's a lot of really good resources. Jinal posted a great book, Measure What Matters. Really recommend that as one of the best resources on OKRs.
Yeah. With OKRs, I mean, obviously you have to have trust with your team, like they're going to get it done, but they have to trust.
Whoop.
Kenny, you froze.
Trust with your teams right now, and like that critical moments of like vulnerability. Hey, I think I might disconnect.
You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that.
We're just keeping it real about remote work, because we all know there's rarely a meeting that goes by without somebody's internet being a little fritzy.
I'm the first casualty. I was asking, what are y'all doing here to build like that vulnerability amongst your teams? Like, I know y'all are doing like some, you have the high fives, you have that moments of like, you're creating moments here, but like when it comes to like crisis, or like the hard conversations, how do you get down to that vulnerability when leading your team?
I think it comes back to, what we were talking about earlier, is just showing your own humanity, right? I think clarity and transparency are really powerful. They're kind of the ingredients for trust, right? To be really honest about where you are, framing what success and next steps look like, so people have a sort of a sense of where we go from here, for direction. But then on a personal level, the more human you are, the more it invites other people to be human back and kind of invite that dialogue. And I think I think it's kind of, I don't want to say that's easy, but I think it's that, for me, that simple, right? Kind of set the tone first and foremost as a leader, which will invite others to do so as well. Or certainly give people the sense that they have permission to do so if they feel comfortable doing so.
Do you find like your leadership style has changed, where maybe you kept an arm's length from your people just because you want to avoid crossing that line of being too close, to where like you've reconsidered like how much more of your life do you want to share with people now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly for me a line and a balance here. I think, empathy has been spoken about a lot over the last year for very good reason, and it's really important. But I also think you've got to balance it with professionalism, right? And I don't think you can ever get to a position where you apologize for wanting to win and succeed and being professional. But everything requires judgment. So I think the backdrop needs to be professionalism, success, because that's what attracts people to the company in the first place. People are attracted to places because they want to contribute to a place that's doing great work. But at the same time, it's a talent business and we're working with people. So you've got to make space for be tuned into what the collective are feeling and make space for individuals. I feel like the balance is individuals need to have some accountability themselves for sharing where they're at, because we are all in different headspaces from one week to another. And then I think it's on leaders to be receptive to that and going, okay, thanks for sharing that. How do we solve for this? What do you need right now? So I do think it needs to be, I think it's important that leaders are empathetic, but I also think you need to balance that professionalism, and individuals need to take accountability for sharing where they're at, right? The burden can't all be on the leaders. That's where my head's at on that.
I think that Julian, I love the word that you use, humanity of people. I've been going personally back and forth on the word vulnerability, because what I'm finding, there's a very fine line between being vulnerable and between crossing a boundary. And it's really important to understand and know when to demonstrate that judgment. And as a leader, I want to be really careful that my message to my team and what I want to portray to my team at any given time is that I am a rock, and they can, that I have things in control, because that is my job and I owe it to them, right? My team, my direct reports don't necessarily need to know the ups and downs of my, of my personal life. And I think that I owe it to them as well, because that's distracting. Like that can be distracting. And I've been on the receiving end in different situations where, I expect a certain level of, someone I report into, like being an anchor, and whatever else may be happening around them, if it's distracting from the work, maybe I don't need to know that. So I think that judgment is extremely important. And I think that's why I like the word humanity a lot more, because that humanity, actually, it's about showing that you're human, right? Because sometimes I think we take this notion of being vulnerable as like, let me just dump everything that's happening with me on you and make it your problem. That's not right. And that is not appropriate for a work situation either. So I've been personally thinking a lot about this lately as new situations crop up in the work environment, and you figure out how you want to navigate it. And frankly, I'll be honest, it's also really important as leaders, personally for me, to maintain my own energy fields, right? Like how we are absorbing so much right now in our personal lives, professional lives. And if I don't do a good job of, in this situation, professional self-care, if I don't demonstrate that, I don't show up as a good leader for my company, for my team. So I don't have a very articulate, profound answer on it, other than I'm confused with the word vulnerability right now. I think it's being misunderstood and misused in some places. And I much rather, I like this idea of humanity a lot more, even over the idea of compassion or empathy or any of that.
I totally disagree with you that you weren't articulate or profound on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's very deep. I mean, Jinal, you don't mind me asking, like, when is vulnerability like truly like crossing the line? Is it when like it's used as a mechanism where it's like awkward, where it's clearly the person is trying to like connect with someone, but they're forcing it? Is there a line where it's like leaders just should not cross because they feel pressured to be quote unquote more human?
I don't know what is right or wrong, I'll be honest. I think for me, I'm very mindful of, what is happening in my personal life, and at what point is it impacting my work, and what are the headlines someone needs to know about this, right? And why they need to know about it. I think I go through that filter. And I think it's up to me as a leader to make that judgment, that if whatever is happening in my personal life or in my mind or whatever is, if it's getting to a point where it is really going to distract the company, is really going to distract me from achieving my goals, I owe it fiduciary duty to my company to inform and, express as articulately as I can, or listen, this is what I'm going through. Here's sort of what I'm facing. I have or don't have the mental capability to solve for these things right now, and I need some grace. So I need to take time out. And I'll be honest, I've seen and I've been inspired by, I have a very close friend. She's Asian, and we just spoke about it recently. She works at a big agency. She was on a client meeting on Zoom when the news of the Atlanta shooting broke, and she couldn't, she started weeping on the meeting because it just was a touch too close to home. She excused herself and she was agonizing over, I need to go back, I need to apologize, and she came to her own conclusion. She's like, no, you know what, I know I am in a very fragile position right now for whatever reasons, and I have to take some time off from work. And that's a conversation she had. And she decided, what she wanted to share with her leaders. But I think it's, to me, that's an amazing example of her admitting her own humanity and, for the greater good of the business and for her own greater good, she decided on how she wanted to handle that.
And I think I like the humanity over vulnerability, because I think that vulnerability is you need a lot of context, and you need to be attuned to the other people to know when vulnerability is really going to serve and when it might be distraction. But that ability and then on the other hand, though, if there wasn't a level of safety to be vulnerable inside of the culture, that they couldn't say, I am very impacted by this and I need to take some time for myself, right? Because then so it's an interesting balance there.
Safety is a good word.
Yeah.
And
also, one other thing on vulnerability, I think often we think of vulnerability as being able to reveal the messy parts of the struggle of being human. But I also would say that on the other side of that is vulnerability to share the things we really love, the things that we're passionate about, the things that make us uniquely us, our strengths, our genius, also requires vulnerability to really show up inside of a company culture.
Yeah, I would just add one point to this, that the vulnerability, I think, can take us down when we think about it, people sharing their personal lives. But as a leader, it's also sometimes you do want to be a leader, you want to engender confidence and direction, but sometimes there isn't a perfect answer, and you don't want to bullshit your way through and go, this is the answer, we know the way, because you're going to come really unstuck if that doesn't prove out. So sometimes we have a plan, this is the way to go, but we're going to see if that's the right way to go. And if it's not, we're going to pivot, and I think a little bit of you don't always need to be perfect, right? And sometimes there isn't a perfect answer. And if there isn't, just capture that, because I think that's about trust, right?
Yeah.
That's about trust.
You got to be okay with not having that perfect answer.
Yeah.
And sometimes though, you can't consistently show up in front of the company and say, we don't know what we're doing. And I'm terrified. And I'm actually terrified we're going to fail as a business. You can't really do that also. It's a little tricky. And I think it's sometimes a bit of a double bind where I need to be authentic, but I also can't be so authentic in my fear that the company is like, holy shit, this is a sinking ship and I got to bail.
Totally. And we're actually going to pivot to a question here that was sent in the beginning from Shay, who's actually on my team at 368. She's an account manager. She mentioned that trust is the number one tool in this new remote work environment. And I think this can relate to our question or our discussion earlier before we hopped on the webinar call about deep work. The question is, do you find that your team is more productive now with being in a remote environment? With eliminating driving to and from the office, are you finding that employees are working longer hours? Initial gut thought on that. What are y'all thinking?
I think that whether you are in the office or remote or anywhere in between, you've got to be really conscious of respecting work boundaries, right? And we've all talked about Zoom fatigue. So I think one answer is, I don't think remote solves that or exacerbates that. In either circumstance, you've got to be really, really intentional about it, right? Maybe more so in remote working because you're at home the whole time. The other part of it, I would say, is that the opportunity for remote or hybrid or anywhere in between is that Office Open Plan was sold as, we're all going to exchange these ideas and it's going to be great. My personal experience is it can easily lead to just constant distraction, where your quality work is like, oh, I've got to do something of substance. I'm going to do that tonight or my weekends. And so your weekends become, rather than rebooting and enjoying life and coming in fresh, become your time to do quality work. So what I want to see happen is create and design work around enabling people to be productive within their working hours, right? And I think asynchronistic work really, really helps with that.
Super important to not go overboard on meeting culture in remote culture, because it's like, oh, well, there's all the space. We have to fill every hour with a meeting so that we're seeing each other. And that is a recipe for failure.
Can we define asynchronistic work, just so everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, so I was mindful of that. Thank you, Kenny. It's not having to be synchronistic. Work is having to be in the same place at the same time. Asynchronistic, as an example, is we would record this webinar. You'll record this webinar. You'll send it out. Some people choose to watch it live, real time, but other people can watch it tonight, right? So doing that with meetings, give people the flexibility to carve out batches of time, 2-3 hour periods, to go, I'm going to go to this live meeting, but these other things I'm going to catch up later. So it's a flexibility of when you connect versus being dictated by the calendar.
You know, this is really helpful. We are in a different zone at Feather. So one as a 4-year-old company, you know, we're in building mode, right? And what that means is you can't build something on your own, right? There are tasks that, of course, once you build something, you can then keep doing them on your own. But we need each other right now in conversations and dialogue. I hate the word meeting because I feel like meetings have such a bad reputation. I feel like it's more like I need to work with people to solve these problems. I can't do them on my own. I can think about them, come to the dialogue with a perspective, but I need the ops perspective. I need the product, the engineering, you know. So I don't want to say that we're a meeting heavy culture, but we are builders right now and we have to build together. So I did find, to the earlier question, initially, I think we were all working much longer, much harder. I think now though, because I think the pendulum just swung like immediately in one direction when remote work first became a thing. I think now people have found their balance on their own. You know, people are better at putting boundaries, are better at blocking off their calendar as this is deep work time. We as a company have instituted, you know, to accommodate for our West Coast employees, 10:30 to 6:30 as our working hours. So no meetings get scheduled before that time. So I think there are things now that are being put into place to observe those boundaries more strongly, which I think are good. And I think people have figured out, like, this is the time I want to take my dog out for a walk and I'll come back and, you know, work in the evening. I think that's the beauty when you have those clear like OKRs as well. Like, it then doesn't matter when you get the work done, as long as you're participating in helping solve the questions as a builder, and then you're figuring out when to do the work. You can then by all means go for an hour-long walk in Central Park if the weather is amazing at 2 p.m.
Yeah. And you know, to that point, I think it's really interesting because so much of the conversation is like, it's the responsibility of the company to create the culture around remote. But anyone that's been remote for a long time knows that it's actually up to them to set the boundaries and to find what works for them. And so I think that the other part of the equation that's not often talked about is the 100% accountability for the individual to make this work for themselves. And we can't just blame the company for our burnout. We have to own this. We have to say, this is what works. I'm going to take my dog for a walk in Central Park at 2 p.m. And hell no, I'm not going to schedule meetings during that time. And then that's okay, right? You know, usually I think it's like fear of like, oh, I can't own my own schedule, but actually nobody's going to care if you take my dog for a walk in Central Park at 2 p.m. Other people are going to be like, oh my God, that's a great idea. I should go for a walk.
Yeah, we are also, just one last thing, you know, we're also very open, like when these meeting requests or like, let's, dialogue requests go out, we specify whether it needs to be a cameras on meeting or a camera off meeting. And that's also helpful because cameras don't need to be on all the time. And it allows people to like, I'm going to walk and take this call, or I'm just going to do my dishes while I take this call, right? Like it sort of gives you exactly a lot more freedom. And my goodness, like doing it the old fashioned way on the phone is so much better in some situations than video and Zoom.
It's like the best dessert sometimes when I've been on Zoom all day and then I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do this one-on-one. Like, hey, I'm putting on my earpods, just call my phone and we're going for a walk. You want to join? You want to go for a walk? And then they're like, oh, that's a great idea. And I feel like we should all have 20% of our meetings on phones on a walk.
I agree. I mean, for one thing, it's like I think it's like people like pretty much said like you have to always be on camera, but like they weren't expecting this happening when they were saying that. And it's so refreshing just to take a walk outside, because that energy that you get when you're walking, like also like sometimes makes you more creative as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I also think there's a thing in the office worlds where which I didn't appreciate at the time, where you're walking between meetings and you're sitting down in different environments. And at home, I'm at the same desk and same chair and not necessarily moving about, walking from meeting to meeting. So having that physicality to get the blood flowing and get some oxygen in the brain is really important.
Yes, that is so important. I find my brain stagnating when I'm just in this one environment. I didn't realize I would miss the trip to the water cooler as much as I do right now.
I mean, like, the body-mind connection, right? We aren't just brains on a stick. We actually, it's really important to move our bodies and drink water and take care of the physiology in order to perform at our best. It's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
What I'm really hearing here, just to recap everything, is like, we talked about like, the favoritism stuff. We talked about like the importance of like walking, demystifying some of the things like having to be on camera. I think what we want to reiterate here though is like it really has to start on leadership though. It's like these are all great ideas, but how are y'all holding yourselves accountable to your teams to practice these good habits right now?
I think behavior is communication, right? So if it's okay to go out at 2:30 to walk your dog, as leaders, you got to set the tone and support that. And it takes a minute for values to become sort of ingrained behaviors and codes, shared codes and understanding. So I think leaders, need to walk the walk first and foremost, and sort of do what they say and support what they say. And then I think everyone sort of slowly starts to adopt it in their own way and feel they have permission.
And also, when you go walk your dog at 2:30 as a leader, take a photo in Central Park and post it in Slack. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to hide of like, oh God, I'm sneaking away, I'm playing hooky. Right. And I hope nobody knows that I'm taking a walk. No, actually be super loud and super visible on your walks. Also, like, start taking vacations again. Leaders need to take vacations and be really loud about that. Of like, yes, I'm taking 2 weeks off from work. Even if I'm not traveling, I'm going to go do something that's totally unrelated to work, because we need psychological detachment from work now more than ever.
I think that the only thing I would add is it's up to leaders to create also that psychological safety, right? So your own behaviors contribute to that, but it's also how you're showing up. I think someone had a question about, how do I do with an employee who's not showing up, going through something personal? I've had that happen. We've had that happen at Feather several times. And, when do you extend grace? When do you actually, you want to operate from a place of trust always, like you want to give them the benefit of doubt from a positive place, not from a negative place. And then sort of see how it goes from there. We've seen this, there's been a lot of loss last year collectively, right? Like each individual has experienced so much. And, in creating a safe environment for And that's a difference between vulnerable and safe too. I think creating the safe environment where, we have a pets channel, share your pictures with your pets, right? We have all these different channels on Slack where you can actually talk about this. One of our employees recently, his grandfather had COVID. It was in a different country and needed, overnight to raise a certain amount of money to even get hospitalized. And, there's enough psychological safety at the company where, another employee actually took initiative and shared that on behalf of this employee, and the team rallied up. So there's just, I think, acts like that when they're communicated, when they are acknowledged, when they are, I don't want to use the word celebrated, but definitely like shown as examples of company culture. I think that's when that safety starts being built and that trust starts being built.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to get on that Slack channel, Jinal. That sounds awesome, the dog one. I would just say, in addition to this, because we talk about sort of well-being and fatigue and mental health, I think the biggest thing, regardless of the model, is work-home life boundaries. The more you can draw a line and decompress and detach from work, as Shane was saying, that's the best medicine. And it's really, really hard to do that if you're working till 10 o'clock and your weekend and it all becomes a blur. Inevitably, your life is going to creep into work. But if you have time for separation, time to work out, time to do whatever you do, that's the biggest thing employers and leaders can do. That is the sort of simple and most powerful medicine we an obligation that we have.
Mm-hmm. We're going to close off with one last question. This comes from Dane Miller here. Curious if the panelists have thoughts on the transition process for those returning to an office environment from a year of working remotely. What kind of support should management extend/expect?
I think we need to be very careful about not pressuring people back into the office before they're ready, because we don't know the individual situation of the people that we work with. And we don't want to force them to reveal that if by saying everybody needs to go back to the office, and then them saying, actually, I can't get the vaccine because of this, and now I have to reveal a lot of health information, and that can be really awkward. So I think we need to set a clear example that it's an invitation to come back into the office, unless, of course, it's not an invitation and it is a mandate, which I think could have its own benefit, right? You'll probably lose a lot of people, but you might also attract new employees that want full-on office culture again. So first, flexibility and patience. And then, I think that it's gonna be an interesting thing of finding how do you really create some of those remote first things so that people are on their computer in a group meeting, even if the majority are in office, and making that okay. I'm not sure other than that, because I think none of us have really done it. And so there's going to be all kinds of curveballs that come out.
Yeah. Jinal and Julian, you have any thoughts on that?
I wish I did. Our company isn't planning on returning back to the office. We're going to be remote. So I don't want to speak about something I haven't thought about actively.
Julian, anything?
I'll speak about something that I haven't actively thought about before. I think just, have a plan, but be flexible. Don't be rigid about it. You got to get the party started. If that is what your strategy is, Vista is going to remain it's remote first, so we won't be doing that. For other companies, have a plan. Be sensitive. Maybe you want to phase people in, but I would just say be flexible about it, because as Shane's saying, people might come back and go, oh wow, it's amazing to be back, or not, and you just gotta, there's a little bit of what's that? A plan is great, but it doesn't survive the first 5 minutes of battle, or whatever that metaphor is. So I think not being rigid is the key point.
Or Mike Tyson's everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly right. That was I should have said that.
Yeah. One other thing that I have been thinking about is we need to reframe offices to collaboration spaces. Like offices were just default, that's where you work. And now I think we need to have offices as you go there to collaborate with other people, and you don't go there to like just sit on your computer and put on your headphones and be isolated.
That's
And
an
so
awesome thought. Love that.
And then, you know, I mean, I think this might be all really obvious, but I doubt anyone's really thinking five days back in the office. And like most people are thinking about like 2 to 3 days in the office and really doing hoteling, which is where nobody has a dedicated desk. And it's just kind of like you come in and you grab a desk that's available, because we don't need to pay for 200 desks and the amount of real estate that requires when only 30 or 40 people are coming in. And then one other thing that I shared at the beginning is that, I mean, we had 50 people in San Francisco, and we now have 15 people in San Francisco a year later. And so we're not going to be building out a big office. We're going to probably be doing flexible third-party managed co-working spaces. So it's the Wild West again when it comes to offices.
Last thing, y'all, we always want to end on to-dos versus takeaways. And usually these to-dos are something that the audience here can do in 72 hours. If you were to like suggest someone to like move forward on their remote leadership challenge in 72 hours, what's like one suggestion you would make? And we'll go from Julian, Jinal, then Shane, then we'll close it off. So Julian, what's a to-do for you, man?
I would just proactive communication. That would be my headline. Just don't assume people know anything. Proactive, and veer on over communication if needed, but proactive communication on every level is the key headline for me.
Jinal?
I would say, sort of a riff on what Julian said, repetition of the company objectives and specific OKRs. Just ensuring everybody at the company is aware of where the company is headed. So repeating it in all hands, in any meetings, in your reviews, like it's super important.
Shane, close us off, man.
Yeah, okay, I'll go in a little different direction. Introduce check-ins and on-ramps to your meetings. So just like 2 to 3 minutes of like it can be like energetic check-in, how's your energy levels, but you can also do like quick questions like the best thing that happened to you the last week, or things like that allow for that quick human connection and people to self-reveal about how they're actually doing and bring that humanity back to the table. And then also start playing more music on your Zoom meetings. That first 5 minutes, play a little music. Music is magic, and it shifts the whole tone and creates more fun, dopamine release, all really good things that happen when we bring a little bit of music into the picture.
Oh man, so true. And the one thing that I learned is being pretty public on my calendar about if I'm taking a walk, own that, and sharing the photos behind that. I want my team to feel comfortable that you can go out and disconnect for a bit. This is a very fun combo, and that was a really good lesson. But with that being said, y'all, thank y'all so much for sharing the wisdom. Julian, Jinal, Shane, y'all were great. I knew this would be great, and y'all delivered. And for all y'all that stayed on here for a couple extra minutes, thank you so much. This is truly one of those really interesting conversations that, I don't think are talked about enough. So with that being said, we're going to send out this recording to everyone here by Monday at the latest. I'm honestly on vacation right now. I plan to disconnect right after this. And afterwards, send us any questions. If I can't answer it, I'll forward it to one of these folks here that can. So that being said, take care, y'all. And make a great rest of the day.
One thing, great job on bringing us together and doing this.
Yeah.
So kudos to you as well for recognizing this topic and creating space for this.
Yeah.
Totally.
Have a good vacation, Kenny.
And one other thing, Kenny at the beginning, Kenny was in like the morning show style presentation. And I just learned from Kenny of using the app. And you should post it. But I'm super excited about bringing that into my all hands.
Yeah, we do that every Monday morning meeting. But thank y'all so much.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Talk to y'all soon. Bye.
Have a good day. Take it easy.